one. Have you and Gareth tried?
Yeah, no, I saw that. I'm not sure whether
Particularly hard to film, or they were particularly funny, or that went
wrong.
wrong.
We could go into the bloopers.
Churchill was obviously a big project for you this year.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about some of the work you had to do on that tank?
Yeah, when it turned up, we gave it a test run in the arena, and it was very clear right from the start that there was a lot of systems that needed work, from the tracks, the running gear, the hydraulics that control the steering and the brakes, and the air system as well, which helps pump up the clutch in order that we can change gear because it's a crash box. So we got it back in, and we started off on the suspension. The tracks were removed in the end. We found so many broken links that not just happened on the test run, but it happened subsequently, or previously rather. And it's very complex in terms of taking a track link out of this one compared to other vehicles, because there's a metal plate that's welded at both ends of the track rod that has to be ground off, and then we have to free the link to replace all the ones that were broken, plus the ones that we suspected were on the way out. It was far more economical from a standpoint of time and manpower to change the whole track on both sides.
Back here, this is the problem, because you can see the outside's moving around the track, but the track pin itself isn't moving. Right, hit it again.
That's the part now, I reckon the track's broke. Yeah, it's gone. Well, Buzz, watch yourself, because this will come back at you. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what constitutes a good track. Yeah.
Okay.
Do about the same now. Keep going.
We've had to utilise the crane as a bit of a brake as we roll this one off the front. As you can imagine, you don't want this to gain momentum and just go crash through the hangar doors. And you can see now, ideally we'd like this track to lay back, a new track would lay back on itself when we dropped it down, but you can see from this angle here the amount of wear. Again, it's an old track, so it's going to be worn. You have to accept that, but if we've got better track that we can use with less broken pins, then the obvious thing to do is to change it, and that's exactly why we're doing this job. While the track was off, we also took the opportunity to look at the running gear, and we started at the front, just worked our way back, and discovered that one of the suspension units had a broken spring on it. Now, as a team, this is the kind of job that we really like, because they hit the books, and in the back of a lot of the World War II books is the drawings for the special tools that you need to carry out those tasks. That then brings in engineering into the fold, and they make the tool and end up completing a task that has not been done for a huge amount of time, and it's that rediscovering of the history, that other bit. It just completes the picture, and it's something that, as the team, we enjoy a great deal. We've got this steel back from the laser cutters, and as you can see, although the profile of the tool actually runs down here, we've had an extra bit added on the bottom. The purpose of that is so that we can put it between centres on the lathe and then turn it into round and put the thread on. Later we'll cut this bit off, and then it'll match the profile on the engineering drawings. And by screwing down on these bolts either side of the plate, we'll then compress the spring and be able to remove the plate from underneath. First time it's been done in 70 years.
Hold it end, these will come out.
And then when all that was done, we had a TA wheel with a seal. That really wasn't a problem. It was just a case of changing that, although the assembly is quite complex to take apart. The TA wheel stands for the track adjusting wheel, and we've done quite a good piece with Matt with the filming and how that works when we ended up running the new track and then having to drop a link because it had stretched in order to get it to the right tension. Because of a lot of the controls that are controlled by the driver are hydraulic, we now need to know that when, for example, the driver presses down on the accelerator pedal, the engine actually accelerates at this end. And Bob's made a test rig in order for us to do this on the bench.
Is the way that Bob tested the hydraulics, is that quite an unusual thing to do? The way he builds those rigs, is that quite strange?
No, I wouldn't say strange, I would say ingenious. There's a number of what we call banjo unions, and these are basically the means by which the hydraulic fluid gets from the tanks along the pipes, and when they terminate at the ends and go into whatever assembly that they're being worked on, you have this particular type of union. You know, it's very critical with these unions that the washers either side of it and the pipes are all exactly the right size. If you don't get them absolutely right, they'll leak. An awful lot of work in making the hydraulic systems and the air systems, you know, tight so that they won't leak in.
The Churchill has got quite a complicated hydraulic system for all its controls. So the brake, the throttle, the clutch and all the steering is operated by hydraulic cylinders. To make sure that these are functioning correctly before we put them into the vehicle, we've made up this simple test rig. That's a master cylinder, so what we'll do in turn, we'll test each master cylinder for the separate systems together with its slave, which is the other end. The sweet corn tin is actually acting as a hydraulic reservoir at the moment for the fluid, and then I'm just operating by hand. In the vehicle, normally it'd be on a foot pedal or the steering tiller. This particular example here is part of the clutch setup. You've got the master cylinder there. This is part of the slave cylinder system. It's slightly complicated on a Churchill in that it's air servo assisted hydraulics. So you're actually using a hydraulic system to open a small piston in there, which then opens an air valve, lets air at 80 pounds per square inch through the valve in there, which then operates this air servo, which pushes on the clutch withdrawal system. In the vehicle, there's a compressor driven off the gearbox, which gives us 80 psi air pressure to operate all these subsidiary systems. We're running it off a ring main, hydraulic and air ring main, which we've set to 80 psi. I'll just put the connection on to there. So there's now air into the air side of the system. That's the hydraulic side. If I move back here now and operate the lever, what's that has done? The hydraulic side has opened an air valve which has let the 80 psi air into the system. The servo's then advanced. If I simulate the withdrawal spring, I've now closed it up, and we'll repeat that. One of the problems we've got with this particular part of the system is that over a period of time, say about 15-20 minutes after we've initially bled the system on the rig, is that it's getting air migrating back into the hydraulic system and therefore stopping it functioning. So somewhere along the line there's a seal not operating correctly inside the system, I suspect. I've checked any external leaks, we don't seem to have any of those, so it's almost certainly going to be something in there. So I need to go on, inspect that, find out what's wrong with it, fix it, and then set it back up again, test it to my own satisfaction. What we normally do is then leave it overnight, something like that, and then if it's still functioning in the morning, we're reasonably happy that everything's okay. This is exactly the reason why we do this on a bench, because it's much simpler to do it here than inside the vehicle, where, as I mentioned earlier, we had 16 feet of pipe in the way, plus the rest of the vehicle and an engine and everything else. So if we're happy with this, the only thing that can possibly be wrong in the vehicle is any malfunctioning in the pipework.
You know, Bob is, he's forgotten more than most people know about World War II vehicles, but the added bonus with Bob is he can invent things to get, you know, and he passes all this on to the younger lads, which I know they really appreciate. Aaron in particular, who you've had on film, and
You know, he's worked with him quite a lot, and you learn an awful lot from a guy like that. And it was great. I loved that piece in that particular episode where he was demonstrating, and you didn't need to know much about hydraulics to see through his explanation and through his model what was going on. You know, it takes him a while to make them, and sometimes, you know, we're pressed for time, but it's always worth it in the end. As that was going on as well, we also had the engine out, the gearbox out, and the only way that we could test these was to build an engine test stand. You know, we don't do this for every major assembly we do. It takes an awful lot of time to get these things out, and more importantly, put them back in. It's always longer to do that. And once you've got them back in, there's nothing more frustrating than finding a leak right at the bottom and having to take it all out again. So the only way to, you know, satisfy yourself that you've done the best you can is to run the engine for extended time outside on a test rig.
Over here, Bob Darwood and Tom are working on the engine. They're currently matching the carburetors so that when you put your foot on the accelerator, the butterfly valves for each of the carburetors all open to the same degree.
Once again, we're back on the Churchill engine. When it was in the vehicle, it had a bit of trouble with the throttle not operating correctly. We got massive time delays and lags in it. So now we've got the engine out on the test stand. This is the best time to sort that out. To that, we're going through the complete setup procedure as per the manual for the carburetors. And this is a dirty example, an old example of one of the carburetors on the Bedford. It's got 4 of these Solexes. The first thing we have to do in the setup process is where you've caught us today. You set up the throttle butterflies. So this is the throttle body for the carburetor, and that shows you operating there. When we shortly get a picture on the engine, you'll see how they interconnect. You've got 4 separate carburetors on this engine. So you've got to synchronise all of them to operate correctly. If you've got one out of synchronisation, you're going to get rough running on the engine, and also the throttle pickup won't be correct. You can now see the carburetors in position on the intake manifold. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. In order for them to operate correctly, as we've just explained, the throttles have to open in a synchronous manner. This is the throttle is operated hydraulically on a Churchill via a governor. I'm just going to operate it manually, and you can see the linkages moving. And then the final stage will be setting the throttle stop screws when the engine's running.
We put it in, and you know, I'm cross fingers and everything. It's done pretty much 2 events now on TIA, and we're still running very well. All the controls are working as we left them, and yeah, you know, it was a really good project because, you know, we had the deadline of Tankfest. It was all done. It was running, and it, you know, it was really impressive going around. Without the catwalks on, it does create an enormous amount of dust. With the catwalks on, it's better, but there's only a little driver hole in that, and when it gets stirred up, because of the way that the air system works, there's a massive fan that sucks the air through that hatch in order to feed the engine and get it to run. And unfortunately, it drags all the dust with it. And I think in one of the films, as you look back, you'll see Bob Darwood when we were doing the test runs with his face all, you know, covered in dust.
It seems harder with a tiller than a pair of sticks for some reason.
Another big project that was particularly interesting to our Tank Workshop Diaries viewers was, of course, the work being done on the Jagdpanther engine.
Yeah.
What was the workshop's involvement in that?
Well, Mike Hayton, our former workshop manager and now technical advisor, was a natural choice to do an initial assessment on the Jagdpanther engine. He's had years of experience with running Tiger 131. His knowledge of all German engines, you know, is really good. And he was tasked to make, as I say, an initial assessment in the early part of the year.
Jagdpanther came to the museum in 1951 and was stood outside for at least 20 years, probably till the early 70s. I've known for some time that the corrosion inside the vehicle was pretty well advanced, and it seemed a good idea to take the engine out, A, to conserve it, and B, to use it as a reference engine for our project. And here we have the engine. At the moment it stood on end so that we can get to the timing gear. What we have here is it's a V12, so this is one side of the V, and That's the other side, and you can see the spark plug leads hanging down, which everything on the engine is original. In the centre here, the carburetors, which we've covered with wood to protect them. Above this are the 2 magnetos, one for each bank of cylinders. As we go round, this is the exhaust manifold from the one bank, and underneath is the generator, and in front of that is the heat exchanger. This cools the oil by water, so the water travelling around the engine goes through pipes which cools the engine oil. And as you can see, this is in an advanced state of corrosion, and we're hoping that we can treat it with some preservative so as to at least stop it getting any worse. When we removed the sump, it came as a bit of a shock because we were expecting the engine to be in the same condition as the outside, and you can see that inside it's absolutely immaculate. The engine is perfectly preserved. Even the paint is still it exists on the connecting rods. Finally, we'll just have a look at the other side of the engine. And here we have the oil tank, which contains all of the engine oil, and underneath 2 starter motors, an electric one and an inertia starter. And you can see by this manifold cooling duct just how bad the engine was. In fact, on the other side, it had completely disappeared into a pile of dust. So once we carried out our reference work with the engine in this position, we're going to put it back upright again, take off the heads to carry out more conservation work, and then the engine goes back into the vehicle, and we have a fully conserved engine which we can refer to in the future.
Another big project that you have to work on every year, as you did last year, was Tankfest. How much staff time and effort goes into Tankfest? Can you tell me about the preparations you have to do for that?
Obviously it's the major event of the year. The department as a whole is working for a couple of weeks at least before and certainly afterwards in the setting up and the organisation and the running of that event and the pack up afterwards. It's huge, and we get in everybody from the standpoint of volunteers. We use all of the staff. It's one of those times in the year where, you know, unless there's something very important, no holidays are granted. But the actual logistics and trying to tie all that together begins very early in the year. Part of those logistics is the running of the tank part. And you know, it's a clockwork machine. You have to get all of those tanks parked initially. You have to make sure they're parked so that they can come out when they're required. Some of them don't turn very well. Some of them will turn better in reverse than going forward.
Because of the success of Tankfest, year on year we get more guest vehicles, and we've got an increasing amount of platforms to move within the same amount of space. And in order to plan that, we need to represent each tank with one of these cards. We set them up where their starting positions will be at the start of the day, and then we run through each serial because a lot of the tanks are parked in front of each other. Some of them are up to 3 vehicles deep, and we must be absolutely sure that when we set them up on the ready line for a particular display, when they come back in, we can put them in position without them boxing in a tank that we need for a future serial. The tanks are all laid out as they will be on the day, and now Gareth and I will run each serial individually, putting them on the ready line. For example, the first serial includes the Hotchkiss Jeep, the Daimler Dingo, the Morris armoured car, the Daimler armoured car, the M16 half-track, the Universal Carrier, the Valentine DD, the Stuart M3, Sherman Churchill, Sherman Firefly. As you can imagine, getting them out, getting them back, getting them into position is okay on the planning table, but we'd have problems if one of these broke down. On the day, we already know that there'll be a few situations that we'll have to deal with on the hoof, but we have to start somewhere.
So I need to know that everybody's on the same sheet when it comes to how we're going to organise it. So the first serial that goes out is basically all of this lot here, alright? And I want them to come out and be on the left-hand side, alright, in line. Then what we do when they go, we bring out the tanks and they come on the right-hand side. That's very important because when this lot come back, we don't want a line of tanks stopping us from putting them away. Agreed? So left-hand side first serial, set up the right-hand side. When the first serial come back in, they come back on the left-hand side. We get them all the way in, and then we reverse them in the same order that they're in now. So everyone happy? Very safe, please do not reverse anything unless there is somebody behind it. You see how tight it is in there, and make sure that the guy at the back of the vehicle has got eye contact with the guy at the front of the vehicle at all times. Alright? And drink plenty of water and hope your boots fit and your mail's getting through. As you saw on the table, that was the table planning, and we've done the shuffle on the Thursday, and now this is the first serial just about to go out into the arena.
Keep prepared to turn right and wait for the half-second carrier to catch you up.
Next year we elected. That tank was a single.
Operation Market Garden Convoy was a bit of an unusual project to work on. How did you get the vehicles ready for it?
Yeah, well, it was something that was going in concert with all of the Tankfest stuff, obviously, and we were asked to provide vehicles to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands, and we dispatched a number of vehicles out there, all of which had to be prepped, which of course included the Morris armoured car. Jacob rebuilt the engine, which was his first real major apprentice project, under the supervision of Bob Kendall and Les. And there was an awful lot of testing. There was an awful lot wrong with that vehicle, from the coolant system to the ignition. And on testing, we found some more problems which we had to resolve. And this was getting quite close to the wire of it going over. And it went over, and I have to say, with tyres that we had to find and all kinds of things, it was very last minute. We were a little apprehensive as to how that vehicle would do. And the great news was, as it turned out, it did over 160 miles with very little problems. And was the success story of the event, and considering the amount of work that went into it, we were really pleased, and it was a good sort of dop of the cap to Jacob, who had spent all the time on the engine. We were on uncharted territory, really, because we go out and we put on displays, and occasionally we do extended displays on other sites, but this was our first real crack at an extended mileage run. Now the enthusiasts that make up the 90% of what was going on out there, they do this thing all the time, so they know that their vehicles can do X amount in so many days. But it really was it was a bit of an adventure for us, and I know even down to the marketing team, because they went out, good selves with your cameras, doing an event that was overseas, and there was a lot happening, and you had to be at various places to get all the footage ahead of the convoys, I would imagine. It was quite a challenge for everybody. And I think when we got back and we did the wash up, there were some disappointments. There are bound to be when you do something for the first time. But overall, I know, having spoken to the lads, that the whole experience, particularly for the younger lads and the apprentices, was a really good one, and they got an awful lot out of it.
I'm Aaron Cruz. I'm 21, and I'm an apprentice here at the Tech Museum.
Let's talk about Operation Market Gardens. You were able to go on 75th Convoy.
Yeah.
So I suppose firstly, what did you think of it while you were there?
it was completely out of this world, really. It was hard to explain. Everybody was so happy to see you. They were all involved. They all were grateful for what we were doing. Even though we weren't involved personally in Market Garden, it just made you feel proud for some reason. It's weird. It was very weird. Yeah.
Did you have to do any fixes while you're out there? I mean, did it give you an idea of what?
Small maintenance. We had a clutch issue on Morris one day, but that was literally just an adjustment problem.
I mean, you fix things normally in like a nice set-up workshop. Was it much different having to do it in the field?
Well, yeah, you get covered a bit more dust, a bit more uncomfortable, but fixing vehicle here or there is the same thing, really. Just get on with it.
Does it give you sort of does it make you think about the crews who'd have had to fix them?
Yeah, as well. Being in Convoy and all the smoke and fumes just blowing up in your face, you think the poor people that had to fight in those conditions and everything, it's just, they were quite tough men, really.
Yeah. For the new World War II exhibition, we had to move about 60 tanks. What kind of a logistical nightmare was that?
It was a real challenge. Sarah and the team have done an amazing job in reinventing that hall. The hall itself is an exhibit because it's part of the original camp and the original museum, and putting old wine in new bottles underneath, for want of a better description. And as far as the logistics goes, it's probably the biggest thing that's been done here for a number of decades. Mike, as we referred to before, he has wrote a very good plan on how that was going to be executed and carried out, and him and his team worked inside the World War II hall to recover all of the vehicles that needed to come out in the specific order that they needed to come out. And then once they got outside the museum, they became my team's responsibility to take off of them and store them, and that wasn't simply just to put them all in a shed, because they had to be put in such a way that the ones Mike wanted back in order to relocate them in the World War II had to be in that specific order. So, and subsequent to the move, then there's the prep of the vehicles and covering them up so that Sarah and her team can get on with the spraying of the hall and all of the other walls and displays that are currently being built at the moment.
What kind of problems did you face moving such old vehicles?
Well, not so much a problem, but it's probably something that needs clarifying, is that there's a perception that all of the tanks that were in that hall were all running vehicles and we could just hook them up with a battery and put some petrol or diesel in them and drive them out. There's a number of problems with that. Some of the exhibits may not have any engines in them at all. Even the exhibits that are in there that have engines in and are capable of running, you don't park up a vehicle for an extended amount of time and then get in it and fire it up. You'll do damage to the engine because the oil will all sink to the bottom of it, the seals will dry out, things will sometimes freeze up, and just by winding it over you can cause no end of damage. So it's a common misconception that we can do that. Any vehicle that we get out of long-term storage has to have an awful lot of work done on it before we even, for want of a better description, turn the key. It's really not that simple. It's far kinder to hook up something to it and gently tow it out, particularly if we can disconnect the final drives, because all you're actually turning then is the tracks and the running gear that we spoke about before, the engine, and all of the internal components aren't moving at all. Even turning a turret, if you've had a turret that's been on a turret lock for a long time, some of them have hydraulic systems and things like that. You just have to be very careful of what you disturb, and 9 times out of 10, disconnecting the drives and pulling it out on its running gear alone is the safest way to do it. We obviously have to be careful of old rubber on road wheels. If we turn them too sharply, sometimes that can delaminate and fall off. And that's why, when we do the moves, we generally have one guy walking on each side of the track, because he's looking at the running gear and making sure that there isn't anything, that we're damaging or, making anything worse. That being said, this had to be done. You cannot do what has to be done in there without moving these tanks and without putting them back. So all we can do is ensure that we do it, you know, in the safest way possible.
Tank Workshop Diaries is a pretty unique undertaking. It's not something that a lot of organisations do, giving an insight as much as we do into what goes on in our workshops. Yeah. You were not hired to be in front of the camera. How has it gone for you? Do you enjoy filming?
There are elements of it that have been hilarious, I'll be honest with you, and I'm sure in the fullness of time you'll see some of them. It wasn't something I was expecting when I came here. I never, we were into the Matilda project, and then, we came up with the idea of, let's just see if we can put a bit of this out there and test the water and see what it was like. And, it was a brave move because, we're not presenters. We didn't know how it would be taken by the public, by seeing like real blokes doing their real. We've had mixed success with it. It's fair to say. Some episodes we think are going to do exceptionally well. Don't quite achieve, but we've got a constant. Sort of hardcore fan club of old-time engineers and people that are interested in history, and in many ways we capture people that might not come to the museum but just like that aspect of it. And as I was saying, we're not paid to do this professionally, and so there are occasions when during the filming that Matt is very dedicated to, and Roz as well, things don't always go to plan, and we're just grateful that they've got the patience to let us have another go at it, and then more importantly go back and edit it all out so that we look reasonably professional.
Lights, I can't balance the fluorescent lights and the skin tones, you see, so it'll have to be slightly green, then I'll worry about it in post. Right,
post-production.
Ooh. Yeah, I didn't want to say that for ages. Right.
Action.
Action, darling.
Yeah. Oh, this is more like it.
And consequently, we've had to change all the bearings. Each one of these units has how many bearings?
So reveal.
So each bogie has, as I said, 8 bearings. You've got 5 bogies down each side. So that's 10 bogies. Each bogie's got 2 wheels, so you've got 20. Sorry.
And show you some of the components internally operating as they should do. That's crap, wasn't it? That was hopeless.
As with the Dingo, Bob's done all the electrics on this vehicle as well, including some of the more additional ancillaries.
Okay, so you backed out of the frame when you did.
Oh, yeah, because it was loud.
Yeah.
So there are, let's do it simple. There are
There's
5 bogies each side, total of 10 bogies.
There's 10 wheels on each side, 20 wheels.
Okay, do it however you wish.
Yeah.
But it's a total of 80 bearings, which can now be replaced because you can still...
We've got 80 bearings. Shall I chalk it up somewhere? It seems ridiculous, I know.
I was afraid of that.
It's a bit tricky with all this oil on my hands. Right, you ready?
Hold on. Okay.
One more? Oh, no, one more good one. Say when.
Okay, go.
Oh, hang on, we might have a winner. Are you there? Oh, God.
Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe to the Tank Museum's YouTube channel, and if you can, support them on Patreon.